Kalau ada satu pertanyaan, apa sebenarnya bioetika itu? Bioetika itu berkembang dari waktu ke waktu. Yang tadinya etika menjadi biomedical ethics, oleh karena yang banyak menggunakan etika itu kedokteran, medical tadi. Namun demikian sebenarnya pada saat ini yang tidak etis itu tidak hanya kedokteran saja, bisa terjadi di hampir semua bidang ilmu. Sehingga dengan demikian dari biomedical ethics tadi berkembang menjadi bioetika, kemudian global bioethics, ya. Dan yang terakhir yang kita kembangkan di sini, apa yang kita sebut dengan the new sense of bioethics. Ini pun saya mengembangkan ini distimulasi oleh sekretaris UNESCO yang di Paris. Pertanyaannya, Narto, kamu punya Pancasila, tolong etika itu dikembangkan ini. The new sense of bioethics itu adalah satu studi dari transdisciplinary subjek, biologi dan seterusnya, ya. Ada sosiologi, ada economics, ada politik, language, bahkan arts, and is studying of human behavior untuk memiliki in having a new tolerance on transdisciplinary attitude. Apa itu artinya? Memang ada keterangan lebih lanjut, tapi itu setidak-tidaknya batasan dari new sense of ethics. Tadinya itu respect for person, beneficence, dan justice. 3. Berkembang menjadi 4. Respect for autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, dan justice. Nah, dengan the new sense of ethics ini, respect for others itu berarti respect pada antar orang dengan hewan, antar orang dengan tumbuh-tumbuhan maupun lingkungan. Ya, jadi dengan demikian respect for others itu ada artinya tersendiri, berkembang lagi. Beneficent, non-maleficent, yang kita tambahkan di situ adalah tidak hanya justice, tetapi it should be social justice for all. Itulah Pancasila.
Center for Bioethics and Medical Humanity atau CBMH merupakan bagian dari Fakultas Kedokteran, Kesehatan Masyarakat dan Keperawatan Universitas Gadjah Mada. Sebagai bagian dari perguruan tinggi ini, kami mengemban tanggung jawab untuk melaksanakan Tridharma perguruan tinggi. Kolaborasi nasional dan internasional merupakan kunci dalam melaksanakan Tridharma tersebut. Melalui kolaborasi ini pula, CBMH dapat bertransformasi menjadi sebuah pusat pengembangan ilmu bioetika dan humaniora kedokteran dan membidani lahirnya program Master Bioetika.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in our Rabuan Discussion Forum. Good morning for you, Professor Bird. Welcome.
Good morning.
Okay.
Good afternoon for you, I believe.
Yes, there's time difference. Thank you so much, Prof. Bird, for joining us in your early hours in Amsterdam. So in Indonesia right now, it's 1 p.m. And I believe in Amsterdam it's 7 in the morning.
Yes, correct.
Okay, and your voice is it's also clear and the video is also clear. So we hope that this connection will be also stable enough throughout our session so that everybody can enjoy our discussion better. And I would like to greet the audience as well in Bahasa for a moment. Selamat siang Bapak dan Ibu yang kami hormati. Selamat bergabung dalam acara Rabuan. Selamat siang. Selamat berjumpa kembali. Selamat berjumpa kembali bersama kami di Center for Bioethics and Medical Humanities. Siang hari ini kita akan berdiskusi bersama dengan salah satu pakar kolaborator dari Center, yaitu Prof. Bert Molewik. Hari ini kita akan berdiskusi bersama beliau tentang clinical ethics discussion dengan judul Dialogical Approach for Clinical Ethics Support Discussion. And kita hari ini akan melakukan diskusi dengan dua bahasa, nanti kita fasilitasi. Jadi dengan beberapa pertanyaan utama, scope of discussion kita hari ini adalah tentang what and how we do recognize moral and ethics issues question, and how is ethics and moral different from legal, professional, and scientific issues in clinical practice. What is the role and place of emotions and stress in moral situation? How do we use a dialogical approach to provide clinical ethics support and experience sharing? of Clinical Ethics Support Practice in Amsterdam, UMC. So, karena narasumber kita dalam bahasa Inggris, Prof. Bird akan menyampaikan dalam bahasa Inggris, tapi untuk diskusi nanti Bapak dan Ibu, para peserta kami persilahkan untuk bisa menyampaikan jika lebih nyaman dengan bahasa Indonesia, nanti kita akan memfasilitasi untuk menerjemahkan. For the audience, welcome into our Rabuan discussion forum. And we will be conducting our session today in bilingual. We will try to facilitate as our best to accommodate in both language, Bahasa and English. And so you are welcome to participate in the discussion in both language. If you're using Bahasa, then we will facilitate as our best so that the discussion will be smooth. And also if you would like to discuss in English, then we can also discuss directly with Professor Bird. So I will start with introducing Professor Bird Molovic, our speaker, our expert today. And will the committee help me in putting up the Professor Bird's profile? And I will mention shortly about Professor Bird's bio sketch. Professor Bird Molovic is a full professor of clinical ethics support and quality of care at the Department of Ethics, Law and Humanities at Amsterdam University Medical Center, and also at the Center of Medical Ethics, University Oslo, Norway. In Amsterdam, Professor Bird is the head of the section Ethics Support and Research Integrity and member of the ERH management team. His main tasks are supervising PhD research, training, and consultancy related to ethics support, including the moral case deliberation and empirical ethics. His main interest is in developing and co-creating innovative ways for integrative ethics support and monitoring and fostering the contribution of ethics support for quality of care, team cooperation, and moral competence. He's the co-founder and coordinator of the European Clinical Ethics Network since 2005 and the Dutch Network for Ethics Support since 2014. He is also General Secretary within the Executive Board of the European Association of Center of Medical Ethics. So Professor Bird is the expert and have so many experience and stories to share with us about clinical ethics support. And today we will be focusing more on the dialogical approach. And I think we will conduct the session rather flexible. Yes, Professor Bird, I think you suggest that according to the plan, Professor Bird will provide some talks. And then at certain points, then Prof. Bird will be inviting feedbacks or discussions with the audience. So we will follow your plan. Let me know at which point you would want to invite the audience, the participants, to join the discussion and have comments. And I will try my best to facilitate also for the participants who are going to share their opinions or comments in Bahasa so that we can discuss at the most and use this session at the most. Oke, kepada Bapak dan Ibu, kita akan segera memulai sesinya. Kepada Bapak dan Ibu yang ingin menyampaikan komentar, misalnya dalam bahasa atau nanti di pertengahan paparan, silahkan untuk menulis di chat juga, sehingga nanti bisa kami kompilasi dan kami fasilitasi untuk bisa disampaikan pada saat sesi diskusi. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Wika. Bapak dan Ibu yang sudah mengikuti Rabuan mungkin sudah beberapa mengenal saya Wika, anggota dari Center for Bioethics and Medical Humanities. And for the participants who maybe just recently joined us, this is our regular Rabuan session. So every Wednesday we conduct this session for bioethics discussion, inviting various experts and speakers with their expertise and experiences And so for this afternoon, I will be helping moderating and facilitating the discussion. Without further ado, we would like to provide the opportunity for Professor Bird, inviting Professor Bird to start your talk.
Thanks a lot, Vika Hartanti. Thanks a lot for having me. Just before I start, is it correct that we have about 75 minutes for the total session?
We have approximately until 3 o'clock. Like that's
Okay.
another, yeah, that's another 1 hour and 45 minutes.
Perfect. That's nice. Okay. Thanks a lot. I'm really, before I start my PowerPoint, I'm really honored to be a guest in your series of lectures on bioethics and maybe also clinical ethics. It's really an honor for me to be with you. And although I will talk a lot myself, as I just shared in the chat, I really like also questions or comments from your side. So as Vika just introduced, I will have some moments in my presentation in which I will ask you whether you have comments or questions. But even during my talk, it could be that I'm not sure whether you will chat with each other, because I will not read the chat. But maybe if there are questions, please feel free to ask also in between. But I have some moments specifically reserved for interaction. I also want to thank you because although I will talk about the way we do clinical ethics support in Amsterdam and also in Oslo, I also have a small contract in Oslo, Norway, the Center for Medical Ethics. So I will present about our work and our vision and viewpoints. I think ethics in itself is about learning from each other. And ethics is not only about teaching what is morally good, but it's also having a dialogue on what is morally good. And if you apply this to this lecture today, then I'm a little bit humble, I have to say, because I'm proud and I can talk about our work in the Netherlands and in Oslo and in Europe about how we do ethics support. But I fully realize that I'm naive and not known with the way you are doing ethics support or ethics or bioethics. So let me stress that I am proud about what I can talk about, what we developed with my team in Amsterdam and Oslo. But at the same time, let me stress that I'm humble and I'm aware that I'm sometimes naive in a sense that I don't know how you perceive ethics, how you do ethics. Of course, we know each other a little bit because we had several preparatory meetings. But I'm fully aware that cultural differences not only in cultural differences with respect to the ethics topics that we usually talk about, but also cultural differences in the way we do ethics or we use ethics support can be different. So again, please tell me also your experiences and tell me also your questions or comments, because then I can learn from your side. I will share now my PowerPoint, which will give a structure for the whole presentation this afternoon. And afterwards, I will share my PowerPoint also with the references of the publications and the papers that I will use. So I will send them afterwards to your team, so you can share it among each other. Although we are also recording this presentation. Okay, let me try to share my presentation now. So just checking, can you see my screen?
Yes, it's already appearing clear.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot for having me again. And as you see, here is the outline of my presentation. As Vika already told, I will start with a personal prologue. Why I like ethics, why I think ethics is important, and why me as a person, how I'm involved in ethics, because you can like ethics for different reasons. So I think it's good to have my personal view on that first. And then I will talk about how do we, if we think we are doing, if we say we are doing ethics, or if we want to deliver ethics support, which is my specialty, then how do we identify the ethics? Where is the ethics? I will talk a little bit about it. Then I will talk about the broader domain of what I called clinical ethics support. So how do I perceive clinical ethics support? What kind of ethics support do we have? And then I will focus, as you saw in my title of today, on a dialogical approach to ethics. This is very important, I think, because dialogue and the understanding of a dialogical approach to ethics is through our whole research. It's not only in how we do ethics support, it's also how we implement ethics support, the dialogical approach. It's also how we evaluate the impact and the meaning of ethics support, also via a dialogical approach. So this is really important for us. And then I will talk about one aspect of, or one form of ethics support, which we call moral case deliberation. And finally, if we have enough time, there is enough to share today. As you can see, the last part will be about the differences between ethics support, psychology, and legal topics or legal support, and of course the role of emotions in clinical ethics support. We will end, but not only we will end with mutual exchange together, but also in between. So if you are here, I will stop now and then talking and give the opportunity to for you to grab the microphone or ask questions via microphone or maybe via chat. First of all, I think for me, ethics, the way the way I like ethics is that it's also always about something that matters to us. So I have the luxury that I'm full-time busy with ethics, with teaching ethics, with evaluating ethics, with implementing ethics. And ethics is always about people, about things that people are concerned about, that are important to them. It's also one of the few moments when you're doing ethics or when you blocked time in your busy life to focus on ethics. Then doing ethics is one of the few moments that we have time and also kind of focus to a specific topic. Personally, I have to say, that's a personal experience. Although I studied ethics, so I started myself, I didn't introduce myself, but I started as a mental health care nurse. So my first 6 years in my professional life was being a mental health care nurse in psychiatry. Then I wanted to become a psychotherapist because I wanted to have more analytical and deeper understanding of the problems of psychiatric patients. But during the first year at the university, aiming for becoming a psychotherapist, I also met clinical ethics or ethics. And then I fell in love in ethics. And I think I fell in love with ethics a little bit also why I became a mental health care nurse in the first place, is I fell in love in ethics because ethics is a way to have close contact with patients, but in ethics you also talk with everybody, so with people, about important and sometimes also about vulnerable topics. So and I sometimes when I studied ethics later on in my life, so after being a nurse I studied ethics and then I did a PhD in ethics. Then I felt that somehow, and this is maybe a critical note, somehow in doing ethics as an academic professional, I sometimes missed the connection with people, because there was a lot of intellectual work, of course, in understanding theories and in debating or even fighting with colleagues in ethics about how we should understand ethical theories and ethical books, but somehow I missed a kind of connection and togetherness with people. So it's maybe a long introduction, but therefore for me ethics is really about being connected with people, being able to disagree with people. I will tell about it a little bit more, and also having the time and the focus and the structure to communicate with each other. So this is a quite personal reason why I changed from first only academic ethics towards clinical ethics in practice, not only in clinic, by the way, with people. So I'm still an academic professional. I'm a professional in clinical ethics support, but my personal viewpoint about why I think ethics is important is that it can be a vehicle to connect with people in practice. And I still develop and write about and think about ethical theories, but my personal passion for ethics, and that can be different. So there can be ethicists, they say, I don't like to talk with many people. I just want to think about concepts or write papers, or so that's also okay. But I just want to share with you my viewpoint, and that's also related to what I will later talk about, dialogue. I think ethics is a vehicle to communicate with each other and to also have the freedom to disagree in a safe way. So a kind of concrete example is that my personal passion for ethics is that doing, for example, moral case evaluation or a structured way. I'm usually used to have a structured dialogue. So a structured way of with a facilitator and a conversation method. It helps us to be critical and even disagree in a respectful and constructive way. This disagreement, maybe we can talk about it later, dear people, but for me, I think another personal reason why for me ethics was important, because in ethics I realized that there were many different viewpoints on, for example, delicate ethical issues. But the fact that we have ethics that helps us to see the different perspectives, to listen to the different perspectives, even if they are not ours. For me, that was a liberating experience. It was the fact that we had time and structure to connect to each other, but also the freedom to disagree and to be critical at the same time. So again, for me, this is still, after 20 years of working in ethics, still a driving force, a personal force also, in why I think ethics is can be liberating and gives us tools to talk about difficult issues that are usually difficult to talk about. So there, in the next sense, sentence, you see the sense of liberation and feeling connected. Again, not every ethicist or not every person is maybe seeking for this. So this is a more reflection about myself, and also some people, if they do ethics support, they want, for example, they want to teach. They want to teach the norms. This is how the norms are, and this is what you should follow. That is also ethics. And that's also an important way of doing ethics. But for me, and therefore my title was Dialogical Approach, for me, ethics also in the pure sense is about a dialogue with each other. I will talk about moral case evaluation as a form of a dialogue. And I think not only the dialogue in itself in ethics is important, but it also gives us possibilities to improve practices. Maybe we can introduce myself as being a professor in clinical ethics support and quality of care. That's also an important viewpoint of how I perceive my work, and also how I perceive doing ethics, is that in the end, ethical reflection is, of course, a goal in itself, and it's worthful and it's important. It's also, it makes us being connected, etc. But I think, and that's my chair and my research in ethics support is mainly focusing on how to create this kind of dialogues in a busy life like healthcare context, how to create dialogues and freedom to deliberate with each other, but also how can we learn from those lessons learned in ethics support, how can we bring them further? So sometimes I say a little bit cynical, the ultimate goal is not to have dialogical sessions or moral case version of doing ethics. The ultimate goal of sitting together and doing ethics is to learn from each other and to take this again back to practice and try to improve the practice. And that can be patient care, but improving practice can also be relieving the stress level of professional, improving the cooperation between teams. So in the end, for me, is at the one hand, ethics is about connection, reflection, and togetherness, but it's also about my passion for creating impact and trying to contribute. Of course, sometimes you fail, trying to contribute to improve practices. Okay. Maybe I'm not sure whether there are already questions about my personal introduction right now. If there are, please feel free to have some questions, and otherwise I continue with my presentation about my department and the work. Any reflections?
So far, I think we are looking forward to your experience sharing first, Prof. Bert. I don't see any raised hands or
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, the chat is not yet updated.
Thanks. Okay, thanks. Let's see if I can, because I don't see faces at all. Yeah, thanks. And please interrupt me when there are questions or when people are raising hand, because most of the screen is my PowerPoint. Okay.
Sure.
Now,
Yeah.
now I'm going to present. Of course, I think this was a long prologue and personal, but I think it's important to understand how I came into dialogical ethics. So our department in Amsterdam is a large department with about, well, at this moment, 100 employees. Our department is called Ethics, Law and Humanities, and it derives from 2 universities and 2 university medical centers. So the University of Amsterdam and the Free University, the VU University. So you see here 2 universities. The medical centers now are merged into one center. So it's the largest center in the Netherlands, and it's called Amsterdam UMC, or Amsterdam University Medical Centers. So 2 centers. Our section's head is Mariette van den Hove. She started 2 years ago, and she followed Dick Willems. Some of you know very well Dick Willems because you cooperated with Dick many years. And also Guy Widdershoven was also head of the department. Our department has 4 sections: a section on healthcare law, ethics and care, diversity and participation, and also ethics support and research integrity. And I'm the team leader or section leader of this section, in which we teach ethics support, do research in ethics support, but also deliver ethics support services, which I will talk about. In Amsterdam, we have a strong ethics support infrastructure in the medical center. So I will present that later on. I will first start a little bit with some theory about the dialogue, and then I will show you how we work in the clinic. So my presentation today is a combination of theoretical viewpoints and also the way how we do the practical work of ethics support. What is important in our work, and also with respect to ethics support, is that we, as you can see on the last sentence here, that we really try to integrate research, education, and ethics support or ethics support services. So people that we hire in our department, we ask them usually to do all 3 tasks, not only being an ethicist researcher in the desk, but also teaching students or teaching healthcare professionals. We teach a lot of healthcare professionals and also delivering ethics support services. And I think that's a fascinating way for us also as professionals to learn from the things that we do, because things we learn from ethics, from research, we can use them in education, of course, but we can also use them in the ethics support service. So let's start with one of the first topics. Where is the ethics? This is a practical question, but also a little bit of philosophical question. And I think it's important, and we don't have to agree on this, but I think it's important if you work in ethics, that you at least should think about, what is ethics and where is the ethics? This slide is an example, a simple example, I would say, in that ethics is not always about euthanasia, abortus, or genetics, or so the huge ethical topics, which are easily recognized as, oh, that's ethics. I think ethics is intertwined, or it's within our work during the whole day. And if you, for example, this slide is about healthcare professionals, what is a good treatment, or I could also write what is good care, then there are different viewpoints on what is good. So as soon in our daily life, as persons, but also as professionals, we use words like good, or this is justified, or this is not fair, or this is fair, then, and even words like this is important, because if you say this is important, then somehow it resembles possibly values underneath the word important. So in our daily life, when we talk with each other about our work, for example, or about life in general, and we use terms like good, then implicitly, so the implicit ethics here, we talk about ethics. So for healthcare professionals, I made this slide that there are different viewpoints on what is a good treatment. And here, I will not read them all, but here you see different viewpoints on norms, I would say implicit norms, on how to come to define a good treatment. Some would say it should be evidence-based knowledge. Some would say it should be, which is another kind of knowledge source, professional guide, should be based on professional guidelines. It should be related to what the patient wants. A good treatment is when the process to make the treatment decision has been good. Here, the last one. More the narrative the approaches. Well, the treatment can only be good if it fits with the narrative story of this single patient. So we always need the single patient narrative in order to define whether this is a good treatment for this patient. So you see, there are different viewpoints. So the ethics, at the one hand, you could say, well, the ethics is in some different normative viewpoints on what is a good treatment or what is not a good treatment. But of course, the ethics also exist or emerge when different viewpoints maybe conflict with each other, the consequence is that there are different viewpoints on is this a good treatment or not. And then, of course, the ethics becomes relevant, because then different viewpoints about what is good comes to life. And then, of course, we need a kind of communication, maybe also a method to talk about, well, if you for this reason think this is a good treatment, and I think for this reason it's good treatment, then let's talk about our reasons and the value and norms behind it. So this is so again, I'm a little bit in my view of seeing ethics, I think ethics is not something that is already there, but you can see it in this kind of implicit languages. But of course, there are also explicit moral questions. And maybe that's most of you are also working with explicit moral questions. I made a list of some questions that we discussed in ethics support the last years. One, for example, what is the right timing to use coercion in care? So you can ask moral questions about using coercion in general, but one of the ethics supports that we delivered was about, is the use of coercion, when is it too late or when is it too early? When should we use it? But also a policy-related moral question: should we cover the high costs for this rare disease? So this is more on the board of directors level, or even on the national level. There you see, because we use the word should, a normative verb, you recognize that there are explicit moral questions here at hand. Is shared decision-making a duty for a patient? So now we're going back to patient care. Are we allowed to dismiss a patient who does not want to cooperate? Another explicit moral question. And again, here you see moral in italics, and the moral dimension of the questions, I made them in italic as well. So about duties, about normative verbs, the right timing, allowed, again, should, and when is it justified? Finally, an important moral question: when is it justified that the supervising professor is mentioned as last or second author? So this is not about clinical ethics, but this is about ethics in science or in the academic atmospheres. And as you saw, my team is also about research integrity. So in research integrity, there are many moral questions with respect to doing research and with working together as researchers. So these are explicit questions. Now a little bit more to the empirical work that we go, because it's important that we understand how people themselves formulate or understand ethical or moral challenges. And this is based on research I did in Oslo, in Norway, in which I, without defining what is ethics, without defining to the participants or the respondents what is an ethical challenge, I try to ask them, if you have problems in problematic situations, what then did you experience? So this category came not from theory, but this category came from empirical focus groups. And we asked the participants in healthcare in Norway, how did they experience problematic situations? And then we filtered this out as categories of moral questions. This is important if you work with people in healthcare, that you recognize that there can be different types or categories of ethical challenges. If people comes to our service in Amsterdam and they say, I do not know what is morally good in the situation, then you see that there is uncertainty or doubt. And I think for ethics, an uncertainty and doubt is a very important start for starting to reflect and also for a kind of eagerness to learn. Many people maybe don't show their moral doubt or uncertainty, and I think ethics can help them to share their doubt and moral uncertainty. But this is an important category, I think, in ethics. Of course, you can also have, so this is about not knowing. This is about, well, I know that I have two different values, but together, or two different aims, but they conflict with each other. So this could be, we have to check whether this is true. This could be an example of one person that experienced a kind of dilemma situation in which he or she wants to follow two different values, but he cannot do it at the right time. So what should I do? I will talk about dilemmas later on. Another one is, well, we as a team are maybe not ourselves uncertain or experience moral doubt, but we have different viewpoints within our team about what is morally good. This is another category than those two, isn't it? Because here it's not phrased yet that there is uncertainty, that the stakeholders or participants are uncertain. No, they have a viewpoint about what is morally good, but they have different viewpoints. So this is a category of where there is maybe disagreement or possible disagreement. We should check whether this is truly a disagreement or even a conflict. But this is also an important reason, I think, for an important category of ethical challenges. This is something about, we know our values, but we have different viewpoints about what a certain value should mean in practice. I like this category because usually in ethics and in vision statements from, for example, hospitals or teams, they have quite abstract values about what they want to deliver or where they're striving. But abstract values, in my sense, is not enough. Abstract values become worthwhile and useful when we know what they mean in practice. So this is the process of, although we all think we should respect patients' autonomy, or although we should think we should respect the wisdom and expertise from the family, it's always, it can be that teams that differ in the way how they do this, or how they fulfill this specific value. So then the ethical challenge will focus on, okay, if we have consensus about the central value, how then can we differ or can we come to consensus in what it means in practice? I think that's much of the work also that we do in ethics support. And the last category is related to what we call moral distress. We know what is morally good, but we are not able to do it because maybe my boss or my leader does not allow me to do it, or because, for example, in the COVID time, because there was not the possibility to deliver ideal or good care, or there isn't enough financial resources to deliver good care. So this is a category in which a person perhaps don't want to reflect upon the question, what is morally good care? Because he or she is saying, well, we know what is morally good care. But then the moral question is another moral question. How should we deal with the fact that we cannot follow our ideals or cannot follow the professional values that we think we should follow because of external reasons? So this is important, that you don't start a question and moral reflection about what is morally good, but about should I should I always accept, for example, the fact that I cannot do what is morally good? Or how should I deal with this moral stress that is causing this? So again, a long story, but I think ethics have helped us, and also our empirical research, that in ethics, as ethicists working in practice, it's important to recognize the type of moral question or moral topic that the persons in the clinic have for you. Okay, let's go to the second part, and then I will have a short. Then we can have a short break together. So this is about the my question about the role of theory. I think, although I work in practice, and I think most of the work that we do is working in practices, for practices, and to improve practices. Theory about doing ethics is really important, because theory can help us when being confronted with practical issues. MCD here is moral consideration. For example, as I just mentioned in my first introduction slides, where is the ethics? If you have a viewpoint that ethics is, for example, or ethical challenges are only there as they are defined in ethics textbooks, then that's a different viewpoint. If you say, well, my theoretical viewpoint is that as soon as persons experience a moral question, then I think there the ethics starts. So a large philosophical, even meta-ethical question is ethics something that is in the experience, or can we know beforehand by what is ethics by textbooks or by theory, and how do they work together? So the knowledge from theory from ethics and the knowledge about what people experience. I will talk about this question: who defines the dilemma or the moral question? So I'll give some examples later on. But you need a kind of theoretical viewpoint in order to deal with the question. If you work with people and people have different ideas about what the dilemma is, then your theoretical viewpoint on ethics can help. How to determine the meaning of a concept. There again, you should have a kind of viewpoint on, do we, as ethicists, do we follow one definition of a concept? Do we allow different meanings of a concept? Do we want to teach a specific meaning of a concept? Do we want to take the participants that they bring in their different concepts, meanings of the concept? So that's all practical, but also theoretical questions. I will talk in the end of my talk, I will talk about emotions. So thinking about emotions, also the theory of emotions in ethics is important in order, it gives you ways of recognizing or working with emotions in the daily work. And finally, another theoretical question is, who has which expertise in ethics? So if I'm a facilitator of moral consideration, what kind of expertise do I bring in? And what kind of expertise do I not bring in, and wherefore? Again, all those discussions are in itself interesting, of course, for academic discussions, and there's a lot to read about this. But I think my focus today is on doing ethics in my talk. If in doing ethics, it's important that we as teams that are doing ethics or delivering ethics support services, that we should think about this beforehand. So our way, this is a full slide, but this is a kind of summary of our theoretical position in Amsterdam about how we see ethics. And we, in the end, we see, well, ethics concepts, ethics theories are useful, but they are more pragmatic tools for improving things that happens in practice. So the famous phrase, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, is a phrase from pragmatism, of course, in philosophy. So in the end, whether a concept or an ethical theory is worthwhile or useful is something that it becomes clear in practice. So it's not the concept of theory itself, but it's how it's useful in practice. So that's a pragmatic approach. And of course, there are different ways of pragmatic philosophy, but I keep it quite general in this slide. So we are, in our viewpoint, we say we are inspired by, because I write inspired by because there are different kinds of hermeneutics, different kinds of pragmatisms. And it's not my purpose today about which kind of hermeneutics is the best one. No, it's just to give you our broad source of inspiration, and that is pragmatic hermeneutic sense in a more broad sense, which is, of course, authors like Heidegger, Gadamer, and Dewey are important philosophers that inspired us, in which they say, in the end, experience is very important when we talk about ethics and when we want to see whether ethics is useful, but also where we can get practical wisdom from, or moral wisdom. Emotions, again, I will talk more specifically about emotions later, and we wrote also papers about emotions in ethics. But our viewpoint is that emotions are a part of doing ethics. Not all emotions. I will talk later that not all emotions are useful, and not all emotions perhaps, but when you're doing ethics in practices with people, then often emotions are triggers for moral questions that are underneath those emotions. So emotions is a good way, for example, for me as a facilitator of moral case relations, emotions for me are a good way to get to a moral question, or to see, for example, if people are, if a case presenter in a case discussion shows emotions like being angry or being disappointed, then I could respectfully, of course, ask, what makes you angry? And then I focus not on the emotion itself, how is it to feel angry, but I ask you, what makes you angry? And then usually, not always, angriness can, for example, relate to fairness or justice. So then emotions are important sources for me as an ethicist to see how the emotions is somehow connected to the moral issue at hand, for example, justice or fairness. And Aristotle and, of course, Martha Nussbaum wrote a lot about emotions and the practical wisdom that we can derive from them. Again, the Socratic dialogue, but also the Socrates is a philosopher that really inspired us in how to build and also deconstruct moral knowledge. So for those who know the Socratic dialogue or the Socratic method, it's a quite radical method in which all kinds of convictions of the dialogue partners of Socrates are scrutinized and sometimes deconstructed. And he always brings it down to what do we actually know and how do we know when we talk about moral wisdom. So really inspireful, I think. Experiential learning. So we are focusing much more in our clinical ethics work, much more on the experiences of participants than, for example, on teaching theories. Of course, we teach, let me be clear, I'm talking about doing clinical ethics today. I'm not talking about, for example, organizing an ethics course in ethical theories, which is very important and very relevant. But when we are talking about clinical ethics support, we have this focus on experiential learning. So this means, for example, that if you start in doing ethics, that we start with what people experience and we don't start with definitions of concepts, for example. We also have, so this is kind of translation from these theoretical sources towards how we work. The facts in the case. If you present a case to me, given this theoretical framework, it means that the ethics, or what is ethics in the, or ethical or moral in this case, is not in itself given. So it depends on how the person that presents the case or the other team members, how they perceive the facts and the situation and how they experience feel or think that what is morally relevant there. So I would never start a moral case variation, for example, with, well, this is the case, and it's clear that this is a case about the moral issue of patient autonomy. I will always follow what participants say about what they experience as moral doubt or moral disagreement. And then, of course, we can scrutinize this, whether that is really a moral issue, but we start with their experience. What is also important that the moral answer in a specific case is always then contextual. So it's not that we are going to a kind of relativism here, that it's all, well, this moral answer is only from this case discussion and tomorrow it can be different. No, of course, it's not that black and white, but you can take lessons from earlier cases, from moral lessons to next cases. But somehow always you need to be aware that in context and over time, also in history, the moral values and moral answers that we give today can change. And I think we should be sensitive for that. A final one, I can talk long about the slide, but I will keep it short to go further to the practice of doing ethics support. The fact that we think we learn by dialogue, or we learn by exchanging experiences, feelings, and thinking of participants instead of teaching concepts, is that moral answers in itself, they can change somehow through the process. So it's not beforehand given. It depends, of course, on the participants, how they evolve and what they learn throughout the dialogue. It can even be, for maybe a short example, if a person comes to us and say, I experience a dilemma, then we, in the first step, as I said before, we follow this person. Say, okay, you think that this is dilemma. So what is the cause? What are the constructants of this dilemma? Then sometimes the dilemma disappears, because if you scrutinize or reflect upon how this dilemma, how the person experiences the dilemma, it can change during the process. Because, for example, I can experience a dilemma myself if I think, for example, I'm responsible for this and this and this. But if the reflections in the team, or with my reflections with the ethicist, if I learn that maybe I'm not in this way responsible, or maybe I'm not responsible at all in the situation, then of course the dilemma that has been related to my thinking that I'm responsible can disappear. So a dilemma exists in my experience, but it can change if the reason why I think I have this dilemma, or why I experience this dilemma, if it changed through the reflection or the dialogue. I hope you can understand what I'm trying to explain, that in that sense, this is a pragmatic way of seeing dilemmas and also using concepts in the clinical work. Maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe I can continue a little bit about the consequence of this theory. And then again, like I said, then we can, the first part is theoretical. And then I can have a break for some questions about this basic foundations of how we do clinical ethics support. So the consequence of what I just tried to explain about the theoretical viewpoints on ethics at the one hand, and the second on how we do ethics in practice, I tried to explain this in the former minutes, is that we do not have to fight. When we sit together with a group of people doing ethics, we do not have to find a fight or create a discussion. What is the true and the right moral dilemma here? For us, there can be different viewpoints. So if we have a group together, it can be the different team members experience different moral dilemmas in the same case, or that some team members say, for me, this is not a dilemma because I think the rules are clear. So in the facilitating, we are not aiming at, but what is the right moral dilemma? We are just taking the experience of the participants serious. And then we, of course, confront the different viewpoints on the moral dilemma or the moral dilemmas, and then we learn from each other. But we don't have to find the true moral dilemma. We also use a case presenter. So the case presenter, that's a construct or a strategy or a method in our work that although a whole team want to talk about patient X or ethical topic Z, we usually ask to one person to present the case and to let him or her say how he perceives the moral question or the moral issue at hand. So this is a pragmatic way of avoiding a discussion about what is at hand. And then, of course, later on, if the case presenter is finished with formulating his or her moral question, then, of course, other viewpoints can come in. So it's not that we only follow the case presenter, but it's trying to avoid the idea we should fight for what the right formulation of the dilemma is. So again, the same sentence, different viewpoints on what the dilemma should be are not seen as logical or epistemological, so knowledge-based problems, but they are a starting point to learn from each other, to learn from the moral inquiry. And also, because that's some theoretical criticism, it doesn't mean that everything goes, so that there's a radical subjectivism. Both formulations and constructions of a person's moral dilemma can still get scrutinized. That's what I just said to you briefly. Final slides, and then we have the break. This is about dialogue. And I said already in my personal prologue that dialogue for us and for myself personally is very important. But I think I would also stress the theoretical importance of dialogue. We have within pragmatism and also in hermeneutics, there is the kind of the assumption, maybe it's not true in itself, but there's an assumption that there is no proof or single answer to what is morally right. I know this is a huge statement, and there are still many books written about this, but that's a kind of starting point in the way how we look at moral truth or moral wisdom. And this is, of course, a weakness of ethics, at least if you think that this is relevant or has some value, then that is a weakness, because people sometimes want to have answers, clear answers. And of course, we ourselves, let me be clear, we ourselves have very clear convictions and beliefs and an identity about what is morally right. So this is more a philosophical statement, but this doesn't mean that people don't have a strong viewpoint on what is morally right, and also say, well, this is my truth. This is how I see, for example, the sanctity of life. So, but if you see as from an perspective on how people, and also in the history of ethics and history of ethical debates, then we say, well, in the end, there is no universal answer. But we respect, of course, that some people have their own answer. I think the strength of this moral uncertainty is that it urges us, or it makes it there is a necessity to have a dialogue in ethics, because we don't have specific given answers beforehand. So therefore, in our department, are we so focused on ethics? And in this slide, we wrote some sentences about the misunderstanding of dialogue, because usually people think dialogue is something about being nice and being respectful. And sometimes I think, and maybe this is also a cultural thing, I think being nice in ethics or being empathetic can be dangerous. It sounds right, it's strange maybe, but because I think dialogue is not only about being nice. Dialogue is also a kind of, in dialogue, we also want to scrutinize each other and have critical questions. So of course we need to be respectful, and of course I'm empathetic with all the participants, but empathy can also sometimes prevent us from asking critical questions about someone's beliefs, and not in the sense like fighting or debating, but the power of ethics is having the moral courage to ask critical questions. And we should not confuse this with being nice or empathetic or friendly or etc. So I hope that our theoretical understanding of dialogue is that it's Of course, we should be respectful, let me be clear. But dialogue is also a theoretical or epistemological vehicle for moral learning. It's something that we need. And within the dialogue, critical questions should be there as well. And I think, I don't know your experience, but dialogue is always hard work, especially if you have a strong conviction or a strong belief or a strong emotion in ethics. Then dialogue can be quite tough and difficult because you have this belief and this viewpoint. So again, for me, dialogue is a kind of virtue that I need to train and that I hope that I can train others again and again. It's not something, well, we now have a dialogue. So with these slides about dialogue and my former slides about pragmatism, hermeneutics, the role of experience and emotions, I hoped I made a little bit clear about some theoretical pre-understandings, so they are not truths, pre-understandings of how we see clinical ethics. I think I stop for now. I'm not sure whether there are questions in the chat or they're not in English.
Yes, there are several. Thank you, Prof. Bird. So yeah.
Go ahead.
Shall we invite our participants to ask questions? Well, I do see raised hand from Dr. Sulhana Mokhtar, but I would also like to acknowledge that we have had 3 questions also in the chat. And do you mind if I read first that already written in the chat from Agung Prasetya Andiana, because I think the question is already coming up earlier when you were providing your talk. And then after that, I think we can go to Dr. Sulhana, and then we go back again to the chat for the other 2 questions that I will facilitate because it's in Bahasa. So I think I would read from Agung Prasetya. Good afternoon, Professor Bird. I would like to ask about what are point of attention in terms of bioethics if someone want to do a research meta-analysis or systematic review about HIV topics. Thank you. So it's more about the attention or the emphasis, I think, if this is related to if the research is meta-analysis or systematic review about HIV topics. So it's not directly involving human subject, right? If we're doing meta-analysis and systematic review, then it would be more into the secondary data, but maybe you can provide your perspective about this, Prof. Bird, if you
Thank you, Wigan. So I didn't read the chat, sorry, I was looking for the chat. So the question is about analytical review about an ethics topic or an ethics team, how it can still be relevant. Sorry, can you repeat the question, Vika?
Yeah. I'm also trying to understand, but maybe if Agung also would like to explain more. But here it's what's written in the chat is about if we want to conduct a research meta-analysis or systematic review on HIV topics, what would be the point of attention in terms of bioethics? So maybe more highlighted issues in HIV topics, the bioethics about HIV topics, but it's research. It's systematic review, like secondary data.
Yeah, thank you. I think so why if we want to do a systematic review on ethical issues related to HIV, then how can this be done? Well, let me try. I'm not sure whether, again, we need dialogue if we understand the question, again. So this is important in ethics. It should be really important that we understand each other. Well, I think my talk today is about doing ethics in the clinic or doing ethics in the Dutch prisons or so it's really about doing ethics. I think still it's very relevant. I hope I didn't make this unclear. It's very relevant to do a systematic review in the literature about ethical issues, for example, related to HIV. So that's still worthwhile. And then it depends a little bit. I'm also a researcher. So, and I did some systematic research. So then it depends a little bit, of course, what is the purpose of the systematic review? Do you want a kind of conceptual horizon, or how to say, mapping of all kind of ethical issues with respect to HIV from the literature? Then that could be a goal, and that can be used in several ways. It can be used, for example, to develop guidelines, or to develop further research, or whatever, or training. And then I think it's important in doing a systematic review, or using the results of a systematic review, do we want to know what people experience within HIV domain or cases, or do we only take a more analytical standpoint and see, well, what are the ethical issues here that we find in the literature? So not about experience, but in the literature. And that I cannot answer this because it depends on how you want to use the review. Is this it's a reaction, but I'm not sure whether this was an answer, Vika.
But thank you for the comments and the feedbacks on that, Professor Bert. So I maybe if Agung can also later supplement if that's already answering the question, we can still continue later if we have time with this question. We can follow up, and maybe we can move to Dr. Sulhana, who would like to share maybe some ideas or comments or experience in your institution.
Okay. Can I? Is it clear now? My voice?
Yes,
I can hear
your
you.
voice is heard.
Thank you very much for the time given to me. I'm interested in the categories of ethical challenges that you have mentioned before, and especially in the part we know what is morally good, but we are not able to do it. Excuse me, Professor Bert, but I would like to know more about this statement. In what situation this condition could happen? And the second thing, I suddenly think about some of the probably what do you call curhat, Mbak Wika?
Sharing your,
Yes.
I don't know, sharing
Yes.
personal reflection.
Yes, some of my friends sharing about their experiences in the residential education, and then I think this is it looks like that this is what happened to them when they come in the first semester on this residential education. They felt that they've been treated not in their mind not good by their seniors, but later when they become seniors and they finally they think that it's something that should be done by seniors, because sometimes we have to do this and that, and we want our junior move fast so that they can they can do the health services in a good way. But sometimes they forgot that they've been treated that way and they don't like it. But when they are in the senior phases, they keep on doing that. What do you think about that, Professor Bert? I think that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sulhana Mokhtar. Thanks a lot for your questions. As I said before, I think questions are very important to have interactions today and not only my lecture. The first question was, if I understood it right, was about the category of questions in where people think that that they know what is morally good, but they are not able to do so. So this is what we usually how this is defined in the literature as moral distress. Of course, we could talk 1 hour or even much longer about the concept of moral distress and the literature. There's fascinating It's a really hot issue, I think, moral distress, and a lot of ethics and a lot of ethics support now is stalled and is trying to make the ethics useful in dealing with this moral distress situations. So, you asked me to give some conditions. Well, for example, in the COVID pandemic, in the hospital in Amsterdam, you see, and maybe this was the same in your country, I don't know, but there was during the waves, the COVID waves, it was not allowed to have visitors for patients. And I know there is a lot of moral trauma or moral injury among healthcare professionals that try to take care for palliative care, for example, for dying patients, and then they were not able to invite or welcome the family, even not for saying farewell or when people are dying. So this is an example of a quite really dramatic and tragic situation of this category, in where the professionals, not only nurses, but also doctors and even the department leaders, know that a part of good dying or good palliative care is contact with the family and maybe already anticipate on grief or whatever, but being togetherness. And this was not able to do. So this is still, I still think that in Amsterdam, some nurses and personnel has left the workplace, or even are still on sick leave because of this kind of dramatic experiences. So this is a dramatic experience, which is maybe in that time, at least before, difficult to cope, difficult to solve. Another point of moral distress or this category is, of course, that nurses usually, and now it's a very cliche, maybe too black and white superficial story, but sometimes nurses has to do things that is decided by doctors, or doctors has to do things that is decided by the leader of the department, or the leader of the department has to do things that's decided by the director of the hospital. So, and their situations can also create moral distress, not per se because you don't agree with what you should do as a nurse, doctor, or whatever, but because it conflicts with your moral understanding. So again, moral distress is not any stress, kind of stress. It's a specific kind of stress in which persons are not able to do what they think are important. Finally, because I could talk an hour about this, I'm a little bit critical about how this concept or this category is used, because if you start with this category only, then people tend to present themselves as victims. So if you want a dialogue on what nurses, doctors, whatever could do themselves, then it's a kind of, if people have such strong convictions that they know what is morally good, but that external reasons prevents them from doing it, it's a kind of passive aggressivity. How do you say passive aggressive? It's also a kind of victim. So I think, thanks. So this, of course, is only a reflection, and I really take the experience of moral distress very serious. But I think we should also think about, even if I experience moral distress, I should still reflect upon how I deal with this and what my role is. So it's not only as a weapon that I'm a victim and that people are not treating me well. So that's a small reflection for later, maybe. And then the second question, the norms, how you treat students, for example, or how students are treated, and how this changed later when they become seniors. That's especially when you work in teaching medical ethics. That's a very recognizable experience. That this changes. Well, what we do in what I would say is it's recognizable. It's really there's a lot of literature also about how students lose certain values or norms about how to treat each other, how to deal with each other, and also to respect juniors or students, and that they lose this when they grow in their steps in hierarchy, for example, in the medical professional life. And we use moral case relations in the teaching, not only in the teaching but also in the practice, to talk about this. For example, at this moment we are having dialogues in a department where we talk about what is respectful. So the moral question is, what a respectful attitude towards students and medical students as specialists or as doctor. So we have discussions about this on the department. So, and that's maybe another way, again, not a way to solve it, but it's a way to make people sensitive that their norms can change and how we should still think about protecting and respecting the way we treat students and juniors. Thanks. I hope
Thank you,
this
Prof.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Bert. So, Dr. Sulhana, would you like to add on, or is it adequate for now?
I think that's quite enough explanation, but I guess we should have a lot more discussion about this, because it
Sure.
looks like yes. Thank
Yeah,
you, but yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
got the point. I think I have a new point of view in see this situation about my friends being there, and then what they experience. So I guess, but we still have to discuss more about this.
Yeah,
Yes, so yeah, but thanks for your explanation.
it's
Thank you very much.
your topic. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sulhana and Prof. But because we know we are limited with time right now, so we need to be strategic. But I think Prof. Bert, because of Dr. Sulhana's question, it's pointing out a good. I think it's interesting about how moral case deliberation can be a strategy or methods on how to create this bridging dialogue, even with a situation creating a more conducive environment for clinical education and in the clinical services. So inviting all parties that is in the stakeholder in the clinical practice, that's important for now. I think that's the idea that could even moral case deliberation can be the methods to start to open that dialogue. And also about the moral distress, how it is important to get that well managed so that it don't cause further moral injury, as you mentioned, because it's one of the things that happens a lot with health professionals nowadays. And I'm sorry, I have to go back again to see in the chat, because Prof. Bert is going to have another part of the talk about doing clinical ethics support. And in the chat, actually, we have 3 questions, but I think I would like to prioritize this one question because it relates with Prof. Bert's second part of the talk about providing ethics support. And the other 2 questions in the chat, one is about bioethics as a discipline, and one is about research ethics. And I think we will put that after you finish your second part of the talk. And I think, so I hope this is going to be relevant to your next talk, Prof. Bert. So if you could respond and then continue with your second part of the talk.
Yeah.
So this is from Bagas Wicaksona. Dear Prof. Bert, is it also possible to provide ethics support for people who didn't realize that they need the support? Or at least start the ethics discussion, for example, in a community of educators or health professionals where ethics awareness are very limited. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for this beautiful question. This is a very good, nice question. And this is also a nice question because it's a challenge. Usually you see that ethics support is delivered for people that experience, like I said in my former slides, that experience a moral doubt or disagreement. And then they come to us and they want to talk about their problem or their doubt or their disagreement. But of course, there are many moral issues, implicit moral issues, and also implicit moral problems maybe that is not recognized. So we in Amsterdam, maybe I should, my viewpoint is that first of all, usually we start ethics support. If you start with ethics support or moral case creation, we usually start with people that have questions and a need. That's easier, isn't it? So then you go to those people, you try to help them with ethics support. And if they have good experience, usually they have. I do already. My team and I, we have done evaluation research on ethics support for 20 years now. And on general, I could say that 90% of the people think that ethics support is worthwhile, it's useful, and it helps them very good. 10% is maybe cynical and think, well, we don't need this, there are rules, so why should we reflect? A time for reflect, very brief. But then if you have the success rates of people that like the ethics support, so the core group that really has the need, then the strategy can be to invite others that are not themselves experiencing this kind of dilemmas or doubts and invite them. So that's a kind of way of trying to increase the relevance of ethics support. But another way of seeing this related to your question is that you say, well, and I see some leaderships changements here in Amsterdam, but also in other hospitals, that they say, well, if you work as a professional here in this department, then a part of being a professional is that now and then you should reflect. So no matter whether you have a moral question or not for ethics support, we should now and then, once a month or 4 times a year, we should sit together and reflect upon difficult issues, even if you don't have a moral question in the beginning, initially yourself. So that's a way of seeing ethics support not only as a service that we deliver when people need it, but something that we should inherently integrate within our work life. Short answer, but I think we should continue. I hope this helped. And let me go further if that's possible, Vika, because we have another 35 minutes.
Yep.
Is that true? Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks a lot for those questions. And again, Vika, please interrupt me when there are questions on the wire. So my second part now becomes more about how we doing moral case relations and how our work in Amsterdam is organized. I start with some viewpoints, and then I will give some concrete examples on how we are organized. Let's see if this works. Yeah. One of the viewpoints in Amsterdam. So now I'm talking about not only how we see ethics support in theory and in our papers. This is also how we talk with healthcare professionals in Amsterdam, in our hospital, or how we talk with the management, the board of directors. We think ethics should not get owned by ethicists. We are, of course, experts. I think I'm an expert in ethics support, but I don't own ethics support. I think that's a danger if you say that you are only doing ethics when you are talking with ethicists or the ethics department. So we see ourselves as a vehicle, as an expert, of course, but the ethics is from the whole organization. It's not only something from us. Then another strange question maybe, but doing ethics is not the ultimate aim. So sometimes I see enthusiastic people in ethics support trying to fight the leaders or trying to fight the healthcare professionals. You should do ethics or you should do moral case relation. And of course, as you can understand, I believe in doing ethics. And I know from research that doing ethics has a lot of advantages and good outcomes. But if you phrase it like this, you should do ethics, then doing ethics becomes a goal in itself. And I think we should stay connected to what people experience and what people need in doing their professional work better. So you could say we should do moral case relations, but why not do you say it's better to say, I think, we should talk about our professional issues and we use moral case relations today, the method of moral case relation, to reflect about our professional work. So now I'm still selling ethics, but I'm connected it to the practice and the context and the professional life of professionals. And I'm not saying we should do ethics, something as a separate entity, and you should all do MCD, moral case relation. I hope you understand a little bit my viewpoint. So try not to isolate the doing of ethics from the work process. That's a difficult one because sometimes people can come to us and they have an ethics support meeting, or we do moral case variation, and then they go back to their department, or we are on the department, then they go back to the work process. And then often I feel that the things that they learn, not only with respect to the topic, but also the things that they learn in how they have a dialogue together, or try to have a dialogue together, they stop and they start again with working. Sometimes I make the cynical joke, this was a nice moral case variation, now let's start the real work again. But so that's a tension, because I think in the end you want the insights and also the reflections not only in doing ethics at that moment in the MCD session, but you want to bring it back to the practice. So try to bridge, even if it's good to have specific moments for ethics reflection, try always to end that session with, how does this help us in our work processes? And what did we learn, and what can we bring to our work in the daily processes? Because otherwise, doing ethics becomes a kind of hobby or educational moment, and then we're going back to work again. And I think that can be a risk. Even sometimes avoid calling it an ethics activity. Sometimes you should just say, like I said, let's talk about end of life, and not let's talk about ethics, because ethics is really abstract. So please stay close to what people want to talk about, and don't say this is ethics. Implementation of ethics support is not the sole responsibility of the ethics support staff. I see a lot of people fighting, and I think some of you also are working with this. You want to sell, you want to make ethics support useful, but it's so important to collect partners in crime. I call them partners in crime. That professionals that are enthusiastic about ethics, leaders, educators, people from quality management, the clients council, that they all see that ethics can help, and that we all together want to make ethics support useful or relevant. And not only that we work ourselves as ethicists to sell ethics, because then it becomes again something only from us. Okay. Now something to how ethics support is organized. A short slide about various types of clinical ethics support. So clinical ethics support. Of course, you have the committees, you have health ethics committees. I don't talk here about IRBs or research ethics committees, but these are the health ethics committees. They are on the clinic, sometimes on the organizational, institutional level, but also on the national level. You have sometimes national ethics committees. You have ethics consultants. Maybe you know, of course, the model that is usually used in some parts of Europe, but especially in the USA, with, for example, the books from Marco Lucio. Here you see the term Lucio. So that's a way of doing ethics. Moral case variation, I will talk about it now, or ethics reflex groups is a way of doing ethics. Ethics rounds is, for example, done in Sweden a lot. Moral counseling, that's often done by a spiritual care or pastoral care for patients and family themselves, although you can also do this with healthcare professionals. But so moral counseling, there are all different types of explicit ethics support, doing ethics, but with different models and different viewpoints on goals and different viewpoints on expertise. Moral case variation is truly about learning together in a dialogue. An ethics committee is, for example, can be a committee that gives advice or even develop a guideline. So there are several things. Not always should you use moral case variation. Not always do you need an ethics committee. So it's important to distinguish between different types and different goals of ethics support and the expertise therein. And we want to say there are implicit ways of ethics support. It's not only this, because otherwise we isolate the doing of ethics only again here. And it's interesting, at least in Europe. I don't know how this is in Indonesia. I'm curious to learn about this. But in Europe and in also the United States, healthcare organizations are increasingly required to have a structure for ethics support for their own accreditation. I also call this partners in crime because that's the vehicle for us to give attention to the importance of ethics support. If you do ethics support, usually we focus on cases, but this slide is based on, well, 20 years of research, as I said before, evaluation research of ethics support in general, specifically moral case evaluation. And we learned that people have different reasons. Well, let me be clear. They have different reasons to start ethics support. And these are also different outcomes or levels of outcomes of ethics support. This is a summary of the literature, and there is much more literature on evaluation of the meaning of ethics support and the outcomes of ethics support. But here you see that ethics support is also used as a way of increasing the moral competency of not only students, very important, not only students, but also the competency of leaders and professionals that are currently working. Healthcare, we talked about moral distress, so ethics support can help in dealing with, not solving moral distress. You cannot solve moral distress always, but at least better dealing with it. And it's important for your motivational professional life. Ethics support can help in making the decision process more clearer, create dialogues, cooperation among teams or new teams. So it's also used in team building sessions. And of course, ethics support can be used indirectly or directly to make policy, codes of conduct, or develop a mission identity. Well, I can talk more about it, but that's just a brief overview of different goals of ethics support and also outcomes. When I go to Amsterdam now we are in Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, we have structural financial support from the board of directors for doing ethics support. So now I'm only talking about the ethics support service. I'm not talking about my teamers that doing research or are teachers, because they are paid in a different way, of course, via the university. But in the hospital, because of our research, I have to say, remember that I said that evaluation, education, and ethics support services are integrated. Well, because of the evaluation of the value of ethics support from the first initiatives of ethics support, because of the good results of this scientific research, we could somehow convince, or we could somehow prove the value of ethics support. And that's the reason that's the reason why we now got structural financial support money to give support for, to deliver support for the whole Amsterdam University Center. And again, not only for patient cases, also for example, the policy question, what is a fair distribution of beds? Or how can we increase the safe environment at the department here? How can we avoid sexual harassment? So the ethics support is not only focused on clinical patient cases, but on many other ethics cases that are existing in our practice. And here, I will not talk about them but here you see that we have different kinds of ethics support. I think this is quite a luxury. We have the luxury of this money. We have the luxury that we are in the Netherlands with this the possibility to create such an ethics support service. So I think this is quite rare. We have the luxury that we have an ethics support professional chair. That's my chair with my team. So this is maybe an ideal situation. Well, it's never ideal, but it's. I realized when I say this to you or when I show this that it's quite a luxury, and I'm really proud, but also grateful that in the last 10 or 15 years we had the possibilities to build this up, and we are still further learning and growing. But this is what we deliver in Amsterdam. We also gain money, or we gain money by doing a lot of training. So I put this slide here because in Amsterdam UMC, the facilitators, we have about 50 facilitators for moral case evaluation. Moral case evaluation is only one thing of ethics support, but we trained, those facilitators are trained by us in Amsterdam, and these are nurses, doctors, people from quality management, people from human resource departments, people from the ombuds, or how you say, confidentiality officers. So let me be clear, ethics support, MCD in Amsterdam is not only from the ethics department. So the training is an important way to give practice possibilities to do the reflections and the MCDs themselves. Also internationally, we are training a lot of people. We have in-company training. We have international trainings in Europe, but also abroad. We have been training in Japan briefly. So, and this is, I think, important that there are many possibilities in itself to train, but it's also a way to disseminate or implement the being, learning about the importance of reflection and dialogue in each team. So I'm really proud that all MCDs in Amsterdam UMC are not only done by ethicists, but by the people themselves within their own teams. Moral case rations. For those who don't know, I will briefly tell a little bit about this and about the use, how we use moral case rations, and then we have another break for questions and discussion. So moral case ration for us, and I think you hopefully understand it now better than if I started with this, because now you know about theoretical viewpoints and how we are organized. It's a practical way of doing ethics in which a trained facilitator, I can tell more about the training itself, but it's a trained and certified facilitator, and he or she facilitates the reasoning of the participants through a systematic dialogue. So it's not a consultant. The MCD facilitator is not an expert. He or she is not giving advice. Some of the facilitators, like me, are ethicists with expertise, and they are able to give advice. But in MCD, we are not giving advice. We have a lot of expertise as a facilitator, but that's more focusing on the reasoning and working with values and norms and disagreements. So, moral case ration is not about just freely giving your opinion and giving advice to others, but every participant answers the moral question for him or herself. This often creates a sense of feeling secure. Maybe a little bit abstract, but a short example. If we talk about a case in MCD, then we have a case presenter. And then when the case presenter is finished with presenting the case or the patient case and the moral question at hand or the dilemma, then all participants should try to put themselves in the shoes of the case presenter to, in the end of the session, in the end of the MCD session, to answer that moral question for him or herself. So it's really about learning through your own and scrutinize your own thinking, also your own feeling in the MCD session. So this is different than, I think, this is different than case discussions in ethics courses sometimes, medical ethics courses, because there we talk about a case as an interesting case from a textbook, and people give their opinions and think what is right. But this is more about putting the moral questions to the person themselves and make them responsible and make them vulnerable to say, but what should you do when you are in this? What are your convictions? And I don't want you to give advice to the case presenter, because advice can be a hidden, can be a form of hidden criticism, isn't it? Why didn't you do this? Or case presenter, didn't you think about this and this? And but this is toch strange. Why did you? So please let us create a safe atmosphere, even though we can ask critical questions. But please answer the question for yourself. I talk a lot about this question because of this sentence, because I think this is important in how we do ethics. It's really about experiential learning. It's not only about cognitive learning, about opinions or concepts or theories. It's about who you are. So it's quite, so it's concrete, it's a collective inquiry, MCD, every participant, this is, we could talk an hour about this bullet. We have the presupposition that when it comes to moral wisdom, so not medical wisdom or nursing wisdom, but moral wisdom, that every participant is equal. So even the professor in ethics or the professor in surgery does not have a better access to the moral answer of moral questions in a specific patient case, even if it's a surgery patient. because moral knowledge is something different than evidence-based knowledge from, for example, surgery evidence research. Okay. We learn from differences, so we invite differences and disagreements, and we try to learn from it. And maybe here, it's not about for academic persons only. Everybody can participate in MCDs. It's not aiming for or fighting for the truth or the true answer, but it is creating a dialogue. Please don't try to convince the other, even if you have a strong opinion. That's okay. But keep it to yourself and just share it with the group, but don't try to convince the other. Good. Again, the outcomes, that's what I showed earlier, but now with respect to the outcomes. And this is one structure. So this is important. This is one way. Is there a question? Okay.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, you can continue.
Oh. Okay. This is one way of organizing an MCD. Again, one way. So for me, MCD is an overall umbrella term for structured case discussion. And here you see one case, one structure, and that's the dilemma method. But there is also the hermeneutic method, the Socratic dialogue, Cura as another way. There is the Utrecht method, there's a method in Oslo. So there are different ways in how we organize the reflection process. But usually they have a kind of structure that beginning with introduction, an introduction of the case. Then in the dilemma method, we are formulating the dilemma by the case presenter. The participants can ask questions about the facts to understand the case, because we need to prepare them so that they can answer the dilemma themselves. That's what I just told you. Then there is a table in which we collect all value and norms related to the dilemma. I will show some examples. Then there is a brainstorm about alternatives. How can we, are there alternatives way of dealing with the dilemma? Then the individual process in which every participant answers the moral questions and the reasoning behind this answer. And then the most important and also different part, then we can have the dialogue on the different viewpoints that we found here. And then we have conclusions and evaluations. And let me be clear, every MCD it can be different. So sometimes we have an MCD sessions, and when the MCD is meant for example, team building, then you use a case, but then the individual weighing of the dilemma is an important goal of getting to know each other in the team, isn't it? So not all MCD sessions should end with a conclusion, an action, or answering of the moral question. So if you have team building day and people have an MCD sessions to get to know each other better, or to work on the culture of more dialogue among the team members, then you don't need to follow all the steps. But if you are on a clinical department and people are thinking, should we stop this treatment for the patient or not? Or should we continue, for example, in oncology? Then, of course, even if you have disagreements, in the end, you should facilitate the group. You should not do it yourself as facilitator, but you should facilitate the group in how can we come to a conclusion or a compromise if there is still disagreement. So again, all those steps are not rigid or written in stone. It depends on the goal at hand, the goal of the MCD situation, session at that moment. Some final slides. This is about a simplification of the value and norms table. So here there was a true case, MCD, that we talked about. The nurse had a question, should I force food giving or should I respect patient's wish? The forced food giving, so this is a dilemma that was experienced by the nurse itself. And in the dilemma method, we write this in a table like this with perspectives. Here you see the nurse perspective. Here you see the two different values, the respect for autonomy and the well-being. I have, sorry, now I'm going to. And the respect for autonomy is connected to A, should I respect patients, and the well-being value is respect to, well, maybe I should force food because of the well-being of the patients. So I think even this is simplified and I think the dilemma method, and especially this table, really helps teams, but also really helps the case presenter to understand why he or she experienced a moral dilemma in the first place. So the fact that I wrote as a facilitator A and B, that I wrote this arrow, makes already clear for the whole group, but also for the nurse, of course, herself or himself, why or how he or she experienced the moral dilemma. And as you can see, it's risky if you only talk about values in ethics, because in ethics you need to know how you can translate what the meaning of a value is in the concrete practice. That again relates to our pragmatism. For what is the concrete meaning? Values and principles are nice, but they can be risky as well, because we don't know really what the implications of those abstract values are. So in MCD, we always make it concrete to say, if you want to respect for autonomy, what does it mean here for you in this situation? And again, also the well-being of the patient is translated into a specific norm. Interestingly, this is just an example. The patient here didn't experience a dilemma. That resembles what I said in the beginning of our theoretical viewpoints. It is totally okay if a participant in an MCD session, for me, this is not a dilemma because of blah, 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 for different reasons. So this is not a logical problem, but this is interesting because later on in the MCD session, as a facilitator, you can say, well, dear patient, or maybe another nurse, why do you think it's not a dilemma for you? And what can we learn from that? So again, we should not fight about what the right dilemma is, but we can learn from different views. Finally, this is an example. This I use in education often. The fact that you talk about the concrete meaning of values is showed in this slide, because in this situation, this, by the way, based on a true MCD session, here you see that two people had the same value, shared the same value, but they had very important, even opposite consequences. For this person, it was, I have to tell my friend what I know about his girlfriend right away. That's honesty for me. But the other person said, well, for me, honesty is only if my friend asks me what I know, then I will tell what I know about his girlfriend. This is not semantic. This is also not politic. This is a true didactical insight that people learn when they are doing the dilemma method and when they are so structuring, so focusing, for having a focus on the meanings of values. And therefore, I think the value of this kind of tables gives a lot of insights in how people reason. Okay, I think this is for now. Again, there are more slides, but I want to have the last 8 minutes to have some exchange as well about not only how we organize or organizing ethics sport in Amsterdam, but also it gives you possibility to ask questions about MCD sessions and how to use it or not use it. Are there any questions, Vika?
Yes, thank you, Prof. Bert. I personally learned a lot from this session from you, Prof. Bert. But I haven't seen additional questions. So I think I still want to save the 2 questions after this comments. Like I would like to invite the participants, the audience, if there's anyone would like to seek clarification or share their perspective about this MCD practice especially, or about the clinical ethics support. I think it's really relevant. It's one of the a background why we are inviting Professor Bert here today is because we wanted to raise the awareness that clinical ethics challenges is a fact, it's a phenomena, and it's already a need, and we wanted to invite all the stakeholders in the clinical practices to be aware of this kind of needs, like how do we want to approach and how do we want to meet these needs about solving the clinical ethics challenges. And Professor Bert, with your expertise and experience, have shared the methods, the strategy that have been developed in Amsterdam. And so, yeah, I think I would want to use this opportunity to share my personal observation, and I have questions for Professor Bert in the meantime, because I haven't seen the participants raising hands. So I would like to use this privilege as a moderator. So in my personal observation, Professor Burt, that the very underlining concept of this moral case deliberations about dialogical approach is in the opposite with the consultative ethics that I think, in my observation, it's more common in Indonesia, in our setting. In my observation, that what is often commonly sought by our partner clinicians are the advice of how do they solve the problem, the dilemma in the clinical practice, and so that's, in our experience, that's what they are seeking: the advice, the guidance of what is the best decision, what is the most ethical decision. And so we sort of the work that we've done in supporting our clinicians here in Indonesia, mostly in the direction of that consultative ethics. And it's interesting to see what has been developed, and I think it's really well working in Amsterdam in your setting with this dialogical approach and moral case deliberation. So my question would be, like, in your experience, in your observation, is there any, do you think there is this prerequisite or characteristic in the context where you think dialogical approach will work better, or why is it suitable there in Amsterdam? And do you think it will be also suitable for the context like in Indonesia, where maybe, like, if I can personally assume that the literacy for moral competence or literacy or awareness about clinical ethics is relatively not yet strong, or not really not there yet, because I assume with the dialogical approach and moral case deliberation, we assume that everyone is aware of their moral values, aware of their, I don't know, moral compass, and their literacy. Like, it's relatively, I would assume that the gap is not that big between the facilitators and everyone on board. Like, they may be more aware about their need, their moral needs, and their moral distress. And if it's in the setting where the literacy, the awareness is relatively weak or still low, like one of the things that we are still trying to work on is to improve the awareness, the literacy. So do you think in that kind of setting, the dialogical approach will work? Or is there any, I don't know, assumption or a prerequisite that you think dialogical approach and moral case deliberation will work best in what kind of context, with what kind of characters of the clinician or practitioners? Do you have any comments on that?
Thanks a lot, Vika, for your very important question, and also to point me towards the difference between not only ethics consultation and MCD, but also the cultural differences perhaps between, for example, the Netherlands or Indonesia. And I'm a little bit aware of it, but as I said in the beginning, I'm still very humble and naive in that respect. Maybe going first to if people see ethics mainly as receiving advice, I think that's totally okay, of course. So if, for example, if there are clear guidelines about a specific ethical topic, clear rules about how to deal with abortus, euthanasia, or other topics, then I still think, and we do the same in Amsterdam, then we are giving advice. Then we say, well, this is the law, this is the professional code of conduct, and in this case, that you, dear requester, in this case, we advise you to not continue treatment because of futility or whatever. So let me be clear, not always MCD is appropriate. MCD is appropriate if people want to become sensitive to moral issues, like you said, Vika. So it can be an educational goal. And the strong power of MCD is that it starts with experiences, that it's not teaching. And of course, teaching is also important, but people in practice that are already working as professionals, they sometimes seem to stop learning. And the nice thing of MCD is that you can use it in educational context where you are teaching, but also in real life, in where people work together and where people have to reflect they work together and how they think about what is good professional work here. So the strong power, I think, why it's so successful is that MCD starts with concrete experiences in practice. And that sense, Vika, it can make them sensitive for the moral issues at hand. And it can not directly, I don't start an MCD session by, okay, thank you for the case, what are your value norms? So this is not how I do an MCD. They talk in their own narratives, of course, with their own emotions. And then we try to distract value norms, and then we slowly, in many sessions, MCD sessions, they learn to recognize the moral language in value norms, virtues, etc. So my answer was briefly, sometimes you just can give advice, so you don't need MCD. But a lot of the advices, even if you give advice to team, is that you can give a clear advisor to Dr. A, but if Dr. B thinks differently, then an MCD session is important to think about it together. So yeah, I hope this made sense, and it gives you a little bit of insight in the differences and still the relevance of consultation or consults. It's not that I'm against it. We do this as well in Amsterdam.
Thank you, Prof. Bird. Yeah, that's also one of the learning points that I picked up, and it's really interesting about how the moral case deliberation is actually a good strategy to sensitize people and engage with more clinicians and explore their own morality, and as well as the students. Like, so this is, for me, this is personally inspiring. Like, this is another thing that we might want to try, and I think it's really going to be interesting to have people then looking up, reflecting internally about their own moral conviction. And yeah, I would personally want to continue this, but I have to go back again in the chat. Like, time constraint is it's so unfortunate for this session, because so many things we would want to learn from you. But
we can ask one more.
Okay, Dr. Suhana, and I think Dr. Suhana would be the last question live directly in the mic, and then after that, I would want to give opportunity for Prof. Bird to respond briefly about the two questions that is left in the chat that I saved. Yeah, but Dr. Suhana, you are welcome if you want to comment.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Wika. Yes, I just show about the dilemma. You mentioned a nurse between should she gives the food to the patient, but I guess in a real life there are so many cases like that. Actually, the dilemma between but in our institution, we are diperkenalkan. We are
introduced.
Yeah, we are introduced. The dilemma like in the context of apa itu KDB ya, Mbak Wika, ethical biomedical ethics, autonomy, beneficence.
The four basic principles.
Four principles, yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
The four principles.
So that's the way we are introduced about the dilemma. The dilemma between autonomy of the patient and beneficence, or autonomy and maleficence. So my question is, how does the MCD connect with the four principle of bioethics like that? Thank you.
Thank you, Solana Mokhtar, for your very important question, I think. I think it's important that you raise this question because in MCD, as I said before, we start with how people think or reason themselves. But in MCD, you can also insert or use or apply principles from out of the group. So, so for example, the four principles, they are often mentioned in MCD sessions as important values or principles for those participants in the case. My critical remark, though, about the approach for principles is that, first of all, if people, sometimes people use only those 4 principles. So it's a kind of copy paste. So sometimes I feel sometimes I feel that they come with principles that they have learned from education, but is not really lived through, or it's more like, I know that this is an argument, so I use it now because we're talking about ethics. So I hope I'm not cynical here, but I think in the didactics of MCD is that you truly should feel it yourself, that the principle is relevant. For example, autonomy, justice, or whatever. The second critical remark is that even if people come up with abstract principles, then in an MCD, you always connect them to the facts, and you translate them into norms. So starting with principles is totally okay, and also the 4 principles or other principles from textbooks. But I, as a facilitator, will always ask, what does it mean here? How do you, what is your meaning or this sentence, and how is this case, and how is it related to the facts? And maybe an additional one is that in MCD, it's totally okay to insert also external normative frameworks. So I talked a lot about participants' reflections, isn't it? And how they learn in the dialogue. But of course, it should be important. It can be risky if you have an MCD session without taking into account, or at least mentioning, the external normative frameworks that we all work in: law, professional code of conduct, whatever. So somehow they should also get a place in this value and norm table that I showed you. It's not only about what do you feel, what do you think as individual. You should also take into account the contextual norms that are present. And then, of course, you can ask again, well, there is also a law saying this and this and this, or there is a principle saying this and this and this. How do you deal with that? So that's a way in, at the one hand, focusing on participants' experience and respecting them, this source, the experience, at the but also at the other hand, to include other external knowledge. That's a brief reflection. And I'm sorry, I have another 8 minutes or maybe 5 minutes, because I have a meeting at in 10 minutes. So
Okay.
we can have a short last discussion, and then I have to go to another meeting with my colleagues in Stockholm. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Suhana. Thank you, Prof. Bert, for allowing the last 2 questions that is already waiting in the comments. Maybe you could kindly share your brief comments about that, because this is not directly about clinical ethics support or moral case deliberation, but I think it's still relevant. If you would share your perspective about bioethics, what do you think as a discipline? Is it a pure discipline, or is it applied ethics? Like, if you could share briefly your view about bioethics and the relevance for us clinicians or practitioners in healthcare. And the last would be like, if you could share how is it practiced in the Amsterdam, in Netherlands, in the research ethics committee. The members, are there all clinicians with healthcare backgrounds, with health expertise, or do you have other with non-health backgrounds? Like, how was that in Netherlands? I think that was what the question is aiming for.
Thank you. Maybe start with the last one. In our ethics committee, we have in Amsterdam UMC, and in a broader sense, in the ethics support group in Amsterdam UMC, we have mainly people with health professional background. But we also have in the health ethics committee, and also in the way we're doing ethics committee, we work together with clients councils. So in the MCDs, but also in the ethics committee, there are members from client councils or family councils. So they are an important part of the group, but also managers, even financial directors, even we trained, for example, in human resource advisors. They also participate. So I'm quite proud I have to say that ethics is not only something from ethicists and healthcare professionals, but really from all disciplines including patients and families in our hospital. And of course, it's not ideal. So I think we struggle with patient, family, and parent participation in ethics support. We struggle with that, and we are trying to develop it further. But it's all are related and involved, because that's also the dialogue, isn't it? It's we also have dialogues with cleaners, people that clean rooms. They also have their moral issues. So we should be careful that it's not only becoming again from an intellectual activity from ethicists, although I'm an academic person. Finally, the bioethics. Yeah, that's. I think there are different. I see bioethics as an umbrella term for a very broad discipline, of course, in which the profession of ethics in healthcare, bioethics, is performed. And then I see clinical ethics as a specific applied. I don't like applied, because then it seems that you use ethical knowledge from bioethics to the clinic, because I think in the clinic itself there is ethics that I take up to bioethics, if you understand what I mean. So applied ethics, I don't like this terminology, but bioethics is a large family of theoretical, empirical, domain-specific ethics fields. You have also climate ethics, you have the animal ethics, food ethics, and bioethics is one of them. And of course, clinical ethics is again a subfamily of bioethics. Then, and then finally, my last sentence maybe, clinical ethics is, I think, again, a subfamily or a subgroup of topics about clinic ethics. And within clinic ethics, you have clinic ethics support. And that's really, so I'm a professor in clinical ethics support. I'm not a professor in clinical ethics. And clinical ethics could be about all the teams that we know. Not only the large teams, abortion, euthanasia, etc., whatever, but also the small thing. So that's clinical ethics. Clinical ethics support is again a smaller group of people that study, train, doing research, develop ethics support services. And that's my professional domain.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. Bert, for your really interesting and really great expertise. We should definitely make another session with you, but we will let you go because we have taken up more than 12 minutes of your time. The contract that we have is until 3 now here, but yeah. Thank you for staying with us for another over 12 minutes. We will let you go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will do the closing with the audience. If you would like to.
Vika and dear all, thanks a lot for attending the session and staying to the end of the session. Thanks a lot for your patience. Also, long time listening, of course, to all my talking. I would really like to exchange more in the future. I even had more slides about emotions and abuse of MCD, but that's for the next time maybe. Thanks again, and I really am eager to learn from your work as well, so that we really get to know each other. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Prof. Bert. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
We will definitely schedule. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye-bye. Yep. Thank you, Prof. Bert. Terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu. Jadi ini saya izin untuk menutup, wrap up acaranya. Jadi untuk Rabuan Expert Session untuk sore hari ini kita sudah selesai wrap up, dan memang banyak sekali materi yang di-cover oleh Prof. Bert, dan kalau sebetulnya ingin melanjutkan diskusi, mohon maaf juga tadi beberapa pertanyaan yang saya izin untuk mempersingkat dan men-summary karena memang keterbatasan waktu, dan kami masih akan melanjutkan program kolaborasi dengan Prof. Bert dan juga dengan institusi AMC, sehingga jangan khawatir, kita akan punya serial lanjutan. Kita masih akan mendevelop beberapa sesi-sesi lanjutan dengan beliau, nanti kita jadwalkan. Dan untuk materi yang tadi disampaikan oleh Prof. Bert, nanti kami akan memproses untuk izin dan juga untuk mengkompilasi. Nanti setelah kami bisa mendapatkan kompilasi materinya, nanti kami akan share di website CBMH. Jadi jangan khawatir, semua recording dan kemudian reportase dan kompilasi materi dari setiap sesi Rabuan akan bisa diakses di website CBMH, yang nanti juga akan dibagikan oleh panitia. Sudah ada sepertinya di situ, sehingga nanti Bapak dan Ibu yang menginginkan untuk mengakses kembali materi atau recording dari sesi Rabuan bisa mengakses di sana. Mohon maaf atas segala kekurangan dan keterbatasan karena keterbatasan waktu dan kesempatan juga, tapi kami sangat berterima kasih, sangat mengapresiasi Bapak dan Ibu sudah berkenan untuk berpartisipasi, berbagi pengalaman, dan berdiskusi bersama para pakar yang sudah kami undang. Semoga bermanfaat dan bisa menginspirasi lebih baik untuk pengembangan bioetika. Kita bersama-sama berkolaborasi dan sampai jumpa di sesi Rabuan selanjutnya. Terima kasih, selamat sore.
Terima kasih Mbak Wika.
Terima kasih
Terima kasih,
Mbak
Dr.
Wika,
Sulhana.
thank you.
Izin live ya.
Oh iya, ini izin iklan sedikit untuk yang minggu depan. Bagi Bapak dan Ibu yang tertarik dan berkenan untuk bergabung kembali, kita akan membahas topik yang lain, tapi dengan konteks untuk research sharing. Jadi untuk diseminasi dan diskusi terkait research, gendered care, and ethics in social research. Kepada Bapak dan Ibu yang berminat, silahkan bergabung minggu depan. Terima kasih, mohon izin undur diri. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.